Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 79 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. This is the weekly podcast covering the upcoming MMORPG Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and its growing community. This week, we'll be going over the recent AMA from the developers and talking a little bit about loot and ending it with some lore from the ogres. Let's get cozy as the Northern Hemisphere enjoys full pumpkin spice season. Sharing some community spirit with me, Desrin, and my grandiose co-host, Derek, as we gather together for this week's Rewind. Man, I hope that intro fully expresses just how much I love this season, man.
It does. I read it and I was like, wow, that's great. That's very descriptive. And I enjoy it just as much. I'm a big fan of this time of year, and I think I talked a couple episodes ago about the fall was ending and winter is coming. Well, winter has arrived here in Winnipeg. We got a ton of snow. It's been snowing basically since yesterday afternoon. Snowplows are out. I sent my youngest son out to shovel the driveway and to walk up to the door because we were basically snowed in. Middle of November, and we got tons of snow already. So,
It's good.
but I think you've got the right idea. I think a little lighter touch of weather and some pumpkin spice.
That is one really good thing about the Pacific Northwest. Like, we've got kind of everything covered in the mildest sense. Like, I just spent basically this whole week at my desk, just surrounded by a giant fuzzy blanket, just like smothering me as I worked, just drinking my apple cider, my hot cocoa, as the rain kind of off and on has been coming this week, and just, tapping on my window. Oh, man.
Man, I can envision the scene right now. All you need is like somebody playing classical guitar in the background and like some patchouli incense burning somewhere. I like it.
Oh man, that actually reminds me. I did pick up my guitar probably for the first time in like a few months, day before yesterday, and realized how much I forgot.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly what happens to me every time I pick mine up. I'm like, I used to know how to play this, and now I don't, because my mind is losing its tenacity.
Right, it's almost like you have to like practice these things or something.
You'd think.
Yeah. Let's give a hearty shout out to our brave adventuring party. This week we've got Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Isaiah A. on the Halfling Bard, Jason on the Scar Beard Lord, Joel Brown as the Scar Shaman, Ziplocs on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, and Bounty Code on the Human Wizard. We get a few Scar. Like the ratio of Scar in our adventuring party is a little concerning this week.
A little troubling.
Yeah.
But we do have a bard for the first time, which is amazing. Maybe the first time, maybe the second time, but Isaiah, aka Tetsu, is our bard this week. So he'll keep the Scar lulled, I think, with his dulcet tones.
I hear Scar have a soft spot for music.
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be like demon summoning chanting. It can be like soft Joan Baez or something like that. I don't know.
Well, anyway, if you'd like to join the adventuring party and prove your bravery, feel free to either donate during our weekly YouTube premiere or check out our new Patreon page. And if you're new, make sure to tell us your desired Pantheon race and class, and we can put you on the graphic. Of course, this show will always be free, and donations are completely optional. But we'll always appreciate everything you've all done for us, whether it be donating, liking, reviewing, commenting, or just hanging out. We love you guys just for being here, really. So I tried to condense that little section there, just...
I like it.
Okay, I'm getting there. This is almost like a serious program we've got running.
It's like you said at the beginning, we're almost professional.
We're almost professionals. Well, with that, you ready to get going, Derek?
I am ready. This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. Okay, Dev Stream Week. So we are going to recap the Thursday, November 11th AMA by VR. As Desmond mentioned in the intro, this was a live stream with a panel of devs, including some familiar faces and a few new ones. So they took questions directly from Twitch chat, and it was all just on the spot. And they gave us some answers, more or less, on a few subjects. So it's really nice to have a panel that was able to answer questions from various aspects of development. So things like programming, things like their creative vision, and of course, my favorite, the lore, because JN was there. Although we didn't get to hear from him as much as I would have liked, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But if you didn't get a chance to catch the live stream or our discussion on Pantheon plus you right afterwards, we're going to get you caught up on some of the highlights here. And Desmond, I want to start with your question because you were the lucky, you were selected for your question. So I want you to maybe, if you want to talk a little about what you asked and what your motivation for asking it was.
I actually asked like 3 questions. And at this point, I forgot what.
So I can tell you because it was a great question. It was talking about the density of the interactable items.
Oh, yes.
You referenced Fortress Devair when, some of the areas, they had a lot of clicky things where you could click for a description or it had some sort of interactive, text that you would read. And your question was basically like, how far are you going to go down that path?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good question because, not every environment you're going to want to have that in, right? It's going to be very different. And that you sort of saying was Fortress Devair sort of the template for that.
Yeah.
Right?
It was really interesting. You mentioned JN being a part of the panel. Was kind of interesting was Joff kind of threw it towards JN, which I wasn't expecting because it almost made me feel like Joppa was more or less saying that the density of interaction like this is less of a technical thing, but more of a what feels right and what is appropriate for the world by asking JN, who, has to populate a lot of this content with dialogue and stuff like that. I mean, it's not only him, but I actually really like the Joppa threw it to him because he can give his input on more what fits his world. And I think it's just a great example of what comes first in this project. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Does it feel good? Does it feel right in that situation? Yeah, that's exactly. And you see that in different areas of the development with this game. Something else JN said that I really liked was, from a gameplay perspective, they wanted to train good habits with the player rather than just having them spam click everywhere, right? So you think about perception as a skill for your character, but you're not only developing your character skill, but also as a player generally. Like how do I do perception? They use the word cadence to describe it. And I thought that was a good way of putting it with regard to what's the proper volume of things that you're looking for in an environment.
Yeah, because I actually kind of feel like he was reprimanding me a bit here without knowing it, because if there are things to click on in a game, I will click on them. If there are things to pick up, I will pick them up. It's when we're talking about training good habits, it cut me to my soul because I'm like, don't question me clicking on every single thing and opening up every single book for no reason. I don't care if it has gameplay implications. But really, though, I think he's just kind of saying that, like, if you click on something, it should mean something, right?
Yes. Yeah, when he said not every book in the library is going to be clickable, I cried a little bit because I was like, I want every book to be readable. Yeah. But I joke a little bit. No, but I mean, the cadence is right. You can tell when things are just sort of done because that's the way they're done, and not every area is sort of custom made or curated in the right way for this. So I thought that was a really interesting question. I was glad you asked it. It was a great question.
Kind of throws to what Joppa was talking about with the dialogue later on. I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this a little bit. But,
no, go ahead. It's fine.
Basically saying, like, between the two of them, it was like one line, right? One sentence, maybe 2. Like Joppa is kind of like, we might have to stretch into 2 sometimes, but most pings should be like 1 sentence. And so I imagine they're trying to tell a story in as little, fluff as possible. So I appreciate that a lot, because we joke about the whole like respecting players' time and stuff like that, right? And I think this is actually a more valid representation of respecting players' time, where it's saying, instead of flooding you with a bunch of stuff that you're probably not going to either read or utilize, we're going to give you just enough so that you have to pay attention.
Yeah, Jan talked about that exact point when I interviewed him, because we had talked about some of the dialogue in the later stages of Devair with Sidara Kitts there, and she goes on this long story, and he kind of said, yeah, that was way too much. Like, her speech should not be that long, and so that's probably one of the things that he probably wasn't happy with, and they're probably going to refine. So it's a good example of it, and yeah, absolutely, it is also a good representation of respecting the player's time. So good question. Glad you got it asked and answered. I want to move on and talk about for the folks out there that are planning on maining a monk or playing a monk. They did give some feedback from testers from the last PA session, because the question was talking about bringing the monk's DPS abilities in line with other DPS classes. They felt it wasn't up to snuff. They weren't doing the same kind of damage. He also commented on making some iterations to the passive abilities, because Monk has the punches and kicks, which are passes but go on the bar. Anyway, talking about modifying that and working with that, because some of the feedback was like, why do monks have to take up a spot on their action bar with a punch and a kick, if and this kind of thing. So little details they're trying to work out and trying to address some concerns that were raised about monks being a little more restricted or impacted by the limited action set than other classes. So that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I love that you like struggled to not say passive actives or active passives, because that was the funny quip. If you do end up watching the full AMA, like, they're struggling to describe what this is, but it's something on the active bar that does something passively. But I love their solution here, and we'll see if this actually ends up being the final solution. But it's basically to make it both, where it's a passive, like it gives you the little extra kicks or the extra, punches or whatever to your auto attacks, but then it has an active side to it as well. I mean, that's such a simple but honestly elegant solution. I obviously I haven't played it, personally, but I can imagine like how that would feel, and I feel like that is probably the right solution. Because it still makes the ability unique. Like, no other classes we know of have something in that realm that, adds extra auto attacks, but is also an active ability. So I think it's just such a simple, elegant solution.
Yeah, so we might see it in the next PA session. So if you're planning on playing a monk, or you played one before, or you're new to the pre-alpha testing sessions, play a monk and see how it feels and give them some feedback on it. I think it's very important, as you can tell by, just this feedback providing this change. And then speaking of pre-alpha sessions, which is sort of one of the big topics that came up, the question was, of course, when will the next one be? And, they said we can expect an announcement very soon. So I'm, as everybody knows, I'm pretty laid back, not really triggered, not really upset all that much. But the word soon is starting to get to be one of those words. And Minus has read the company manual of saying soon when they don't want to be specific about something. They did allude to it being before the end of the year.
Yeah.
I think that was sort of the conclusion at the end of the day. And the question then is, when that time comes, what can testers expect? So unfortunately, the warrior is not going to be available. That question was asked and they said no. They had previously talked about the warrior, paladin, and cleric, being in playable states. So there was hope that it would be part of the next PA session. They said that the reason they're not, I guess, because they want to use this PA session as sort of a send-off, was the term that Joppa used to the current state of the client. So we are going to go back and play. They're going to be done in the gray box zones, the same sort of environments we've seen before in previous pre-alpha sessions. It won't be using the new HDRP client, which we saw in the last developer stream, or the one before now. Anyway, a couple streams ago maybe. And I'll be honest here, I was very much under the impression that like the gray box zones were they were moving on. Like they said, everything had been, run through the HDRP pipeline, and the textures had been put down, or not the textures, but converted from gray box. So that's clarified a little bit that the next session won't include that. But it wasn't all bad news, because Joppa did say that when the new year comes and they want to be in full HDRP mode, and that means they'll be much closer to alpha. So we sort of take the good and we take the bad and we put it together. And from this, those aforementioned classes, those are going to follow. So my question here is this one, and I'm hopeful that people understand where I'm coming from when I say this, but other VIPs might not appreciate it. But I'm wondering about this upcoming PA session, if it's worth it, as they said they want to do a send off for the client. What information are they still targeting here? What are they looking for? This references back to what we talked about last week with regard to focus tests and those much smaller bite-sized tests, but this being a bigger session potentially. I wonder what they're trying to get out of this. I hope it isn't being done just to satisfy the demands of pre-alpha testers, of the VIPs, because that pressure is there and it's at the expense of development resources. Any thoughts on that, Des? Am I off here?
Well, I think it's worth noting that just because we aren't going to be testing the new client doesn't mean we're testing something that doesn't help the new client. Keep in mind that all the like mechanical things are probably going to be like persisting through, regardless of HDRP or not. So class design and, like going through like Halnirs, for example, is probably not going to change too much between the old RP and the HDRP, functionally speaking. So we can still fully test a lot of mechanics and changes that they've done to those kind of things, because those don't necessarily have to be native to the HDRP. Not to mention, I'll admit, like there is a soft spot in my heart saying like, it's going to be potentially end of year, so like holiday time, and we're all going to be together. The whole PA crew, the devs, and everything. We're going to be kind of like, I don't know. I love the idea of the send off. Like this is the last time we're going to see the game like this. And
that's a funny point, because I feel the same way. I do, having a little bit of a connection to the way that the world looks right now, to know that it's going to be changing. I'm a little bit torn, because getting back in there for one last bit and with it looking this way is kind of, does get the feels a little bit too.
Yeah. So on one hand, is it, because you asked, like, is it worth it? Right. Like,
yeah, that's the question.
So what if, besides like us actually still being able to give valid feedback, because it's not like we're just testing some legacy thing that doesn't matter, that they can't derive feedback or bug reports from. Besides that, let me just propose, maybe it's something like the devs want to do, like for just because they see this as an end of an age as well. Maybe they just want to spend a PA session with the loyal PA crew that's stuck around through, the good and bad times, and like
maybe
whether or not that's the case. I don't want to speak for VR, but if I was working there and that was an option, if I could, because they do these usually on the weekends, so like if I could throw my weekend away to spend some time with the testers and end of year send off to the old client and all this, I would totally do that. One of my oldest screenshots that survived my big hard drive crash was the end of beta 2.5 in Vanguard, I think it was, where I still remember his name, GM Tage, who I can't remember his like actual name, unfortunately, but GM Tage and GM Kijay did like server chat and they're just talking to the beta testers, saying like, "Hey guys, like we're about to go into a new phase. Like there's a bunch of new invites that are going to be sent out. Like there's just going to be a lot more people coming in, and we're not going to probably be able to have the same like relationship that we do right now." And it was a really touching thing. And I got a screenshot of like part of that convo, and I really treasure that. So is it the most efficient use of resources? Well, I would argue that they are going to get something out of it for development. So
sure,
there's that, but also the nostalgia thing.
Yeah, no, a good point. I mean, we don't really know. We're just sort of guessing, and like we talked about the monk, maybe this is, one of the things that they're really, they're looking for. So it's just all these little things that it could be, and either way, I'm happy to contribute again to any testing they need to do. And the silver lining is that if you are interested in joining, pre-alpha testing, obviously there's still a good reason to do so. Joppa had a good quote here. He said, quote, "What it means to be a pre-alpha tester is going to deepen and broaden very substantially in the coming months." So that's exciting in terms of moving forward with testing and focused efforts. So so look forward to that. The other thing that was brought up is a good question. They said, how much of alpha is going to be VR assets? So talking about specifically in-house versus Unity type of assets. And Joppa really did a good job of clarifying how they want to manage their outsourcing of art and assets very carefully. They want to find that balance between in-house design and being efficient and getting the job done. The idea being no gray boxing come alpha, but there will still be some Unity assets, right? And I think that's fair. And JN actually had a really good line sort of to give context to this. I thought about making assets meaningful means more than just them being unique, right? So it's more important that whatever you're talking about has something about it that's, its nature, or something written or something describing it that makes it unique. How it looks, maybe not necessarily, right? So that really spoke to me. I can say that what this makes me think of is looking at the Halner cave streams. We know that those are Unity assets for the most part, but they've been tweaked, they've been modified by the team. And the big number that came out of this, and was sort of a bean that got lost, but Joppa said about 20% of the total assets right now have been converted to HDRP at this point. So he noted that that's the current focus. And in fact, sort of scheduled a meeting with Kyle in real time during the AMA to get some things done, in terms of planning and wanting to move forward with this. So stay tuned because it sounded like he's going to talk about this a little more in the producer's letter next week. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm really glad they kind of clarified about Unity assets not being a bad thing. I think chat was really on board too, which I was kind of proud of. The main point is just if something is there to be used that improves the efficiency of development, essentially it just means something that gets us the game quicker, that doesn't really have a downside. Especially with the size of the Unity store, now, what is on there, there's so much. There's people that their entire careers are dedicated to basically making assets. That's just what they do. And so it's basically a pick and choose marketplace for hey, this looks perfect for, this kind of cave idea that we have. Let's grab that. It's totally efficient and amazing. So why not use that? And I love that we're starting to get on board for the idea of that, not seeing it as a cheap, I don't know. No,
I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree 100%. It's if I'm a woodworker, if I can do woodworking, I'm not going to do everything in my home. I'm not going to make everything in my home. I'm going to buy some stuff at various stores, because I don't, I can't make that myself, or it just looks better, we do need to sort of get away from that mindset of just, store-bought assets being somehow a bad thing. Of course, you don't want everything. And this is what they were talking about.
Right. It's you might not plane every 2x4, but you might, carve the centerpiece, above the fireplace. And that's I think that's exactly what we're going for with Pantheon. The basic stuff can be whatever, in-house, out of house, whatever. But we're going to have some special things probably that they get to really like spend the time to make perfect. And oh man, it's just so great. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and anything they buy in the Unistore, they can just get JN to give it a good story, a backstory, and then it's okay.
That's right.
So, and speaking of JN, he got a little was feeling the heat, I think, when he got asked about the locations from the bait, which you'll all remember we just heard recently, being in the game at launch. It was a pretty good question, and I'm going to give you a little breakdown. So, firstly, JN confirmed Kadasa will be in the game at launch because that's the dwarves' starting city. He knew that. Now, the other places, and you go back to Kadasa for a second, it's on the continent of Whitethaw, which is also very cool because we haven't really seen too much of that. But the other places that were referenced were the petrified forest of Kakalar. And then, so JN said he believes it will be in at launch. He said it's on Rainfall, but he deferred to Joppa just for confirmation. And while Joppa didn't give us 100% yes, he did say he was fairly confident that places can basically, be created. They can spring up rather easily with their content creation process, and in particular islands. So it's kind of neat because they were asking also about the Didiglian Vels from the story, which is a brand new location, and really don't have any reference point for that. So the quote that I took away from this was when Joppa said, quote, any place they've been able to speak to in the lore would be available at some point in the game's life. So that's pretty cool. And he did say the more iconic places will be in at launch. So music to my ears. And then there was a bit he mentioned about Burning Sanctum, and that's even better. And I'll explain a little bit why in a minute here. But just remember that for now. But this is pretty cool, right? Because we're now we this is why I'm such a big believer in lore, because we read these stories, we picture them, we get these images in our minds, and we sort of have a feel for it. And then you hear that they're creating that area. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a vibe in my head for the Vels. But I could totally see that being something, it's going to be a while before launch, like being realistic. This story, as much as I love it right now, it's going to fade. People are going to forget about it. And then, later down the line, maybe an expansion or something, and they put the Didiglian Vels in there, and we're going to be like, oh my gosh, we know what happened there. Like, all this. Oh, it's going to be a blast.
And you know what, when we're there, you know what we should be worried about, right?
Well, I mean,
can you guess?
Giant.
Yes, giant worms coming up from beneath the ground and swallowing us in their entirety with their weird eyeball stack inside their beaks.
Weird hairy insects, that's what I picture in my head, was like hairy insects that are like half
living inside them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine a raid zone inside of a creature. It makes me think of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. You go into the fish.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Anyway, we are going deep into the imaginations.
This is what lore does. This is why lore is so awesome, because your imagination goes crazy. Anyway, so that was the AMA. Des, was there anything else on from this that you wanted to mention before we move on?
Not much that we didn't talk about on the Plus U. Haha, shameless plug.
Yeah, so if you want to check that out, it should be posted on YouTube, on our channel on YouTube, the Pantheon Plus U, where me, Nathan Napalm, and Drac did the show afterwards and took some callers and chatted about it. So yeah, go check that out. In terms of a Pantheon Plus update, as you know, Drac has been streaming Monday nights at midnight Eastern Standard Time on Pantheon Plus Twitch channel. And he's gone back to his first love, the game of many people's first love, 20 years later, is EverQuest. He's got a good group together consisting of some Pantheon fans, and they are on the Thornblade server. And I asked him to put together a little teaser trailer for those of you that are watching here on YouTube. So I'm going to put that in here. And if you're on audio only, just picture, when it gets to a certain point, just picture a bunch of cat people, noobs, running around killing fire beetles, and you'll get the picture here. So here's a little teaser trailer for Monday Nights with Drac.
Hi, I'm Drac Attack, and that music gets my blood pumping 20 years later. So fun. And so if you want to go back and relive the EQ memories, you should join us Monday nights, midnight, Eastern Standard Time, right here on the Pantheon Plus Twitch channel.
I don't think I've hit this thing yet.
Yeah, what level is it? Level 19?
It's after hours. Pantheon Plus after hours.
Good thing.
Well, that's going to be...
Get the hot tubs ready.
That's going to be our thing when Pantheon launches. We're going to be the late night crew.
Are you serious? What are you doing?
Whoa!
He's
He's still boxing, ladies and gentlemen. Still boxing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Energy drinks.
Hey, Daimlos, have you bought any energy drinks lately?
I certainly have.
All right, so that was fun. And as always, we've got the Pantheon Plus weekly content calendar, which you'll see on the screen. I noted a moment ago, but I've got a lore video coming on Tuesday called The Sanctums, which is all about the Sanctums in Terminus. So the Burning Sanctum, the Frozen and the Silent Sanctum. And like I said, Joppa referenced the Burning Sanctum, and there's a little clip in there from him talking about it on the AMA, which is super helpful, and I really appreciated him doing that. I guess it was just coincidence, but maybe the gods are smiling down on me. So I look forward to publishing that, and I look forward to seeing everybody, share your thoughts, comments, whatever about it. And so the rest of the calendar you'll see there. There's lots of stuff coming up this week, and that is it for this week's VR News and Notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
Right, for this week's community discussion, we've got a rather predictable one, I guess. The thread is It's Raining Gear by Mugwai44, also known as Mugs. So we know him as Mugs. So, but that's going to be on the official forums. This thread was actually promoted on VR's official Twitter account after a little bit. So, there's a ton of responses, both on Twitter and in the forum. So I'm really just going to be scratching the surface here, but very prevalent question. So Mug's original post points out that the typical MMO, or I should say typical modern MMO, tends to shovel gear down our throats, like throwing so much at us that getting new gear often doesn't feel as meaningful, since we're more just kind of temporarily equipping stuff until max level. He also points out a few other nuances, like item affixes, like of the tiger, of the serpent. And also that there being kind of a difference between a slot unlocking at a certain level, like, some games that you're like, oh, you can equip rings now at level 35. Or whatever, versus simply just like having open slots because you haven't found an item that goes into that yet, because those types of items are just not super common. So just a lot of really good places I think the conversation can go. So like I think this is just really prevalent just because this is Pantheon, and item identity is the big thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, Mugs is saying it feels pretty silly to strive for gear slots until max level, since you're probably just replacing it anyway. So I actually, in the AMA, I think I remember the devs even talking about that a little bit. Yeah.
So it was brought up in the context of how do you stop people from racing to max level? Like, what are the disadvantages of doing that? And one of the reasons what that was given, I think it was Adam was talking about missing out. Like, you're going to miss out on so much content. You're going to miss out on items that are exceptional along the way and fun to use and interesting. I think that I really keyed in on that, because I do believe in, finding I target items in MMOs. Like, I tend to, like, even if it's not something that might be best for me or best that I can get, certain items I get an affinity for, and I have to have it, right?
Yeah. Items of renown.
I think, yes, items of renown. Exactly.
Yeah. I I agree, and I think we've been exposed to something else for a really long time, so I'm kind of already on board with what I think Muggs is kind of getting here. But let's start with some response here. So first off, we've got Viek saying they don't necessarily hate MMOs that throw a ton of gear at you, but they definitely think it's a big missed opportunity, pointing out that economic design should be factored into how much or how little gear is dropped, kind of, how it ties into the economy. Because I think he's spot on in saying some games work with having a ton of drops, but if you took those away, it would actually cause kind of a gap in the game, or a gap in the economy. Because these are complicated systems, right? Like, you take one thing away, who knows what the repercussions are, right?
This might be the first time that I can remember that I completely agree with Yek. I usually don't agree with many things he says on the forums, or they say on the forums. I think our brains just work very, very differently. I completely agree with him here. The economy is not often considered when you talk about the volume of items and gear that you get along the way, the constant influx of items that are absolutely pretty much valueless because there's so many options is a real thing. Scarcity is what a base economic principle. If you take economics 101, you'll learn scarcity and availability are such a fundamental feature. And I think a lot of game design has gotten to the point where if you're not getting something every 10 seconds or every 2 minutes, whatever, it's seen as like, I'm bored, I'm out, I can't play this anymore because I didn't get rewarded for, I don't have something, even if it's trivial, meaningless, you're just going to scrap it and throw it in the garbage anyway. They still want people to feel like they're getting something. And that's a problem.
Yeah, because tying that into economics is really interesting, because I'm kind of thinking, if a piece of gear exists with basically every stat combination you can think of, for every, I guess you could say level range, even though we know that's going to be less of a factor in Pantheon, you could imagine always kind of feeling a certain pressure to always check the broker for an item that has one more stat point than the previous one, and feeling like that is the normal gameplay rather than playing the game to get your gear. At least throughout the levels.
Less is more, and in so many things, less is more. I can't think of any recent MMOs where I've looted something in the first 25 levels that I thought, this is amazing and I'm keeping this forever. You know what I mean?
Right.
I want that feeling. I want that to be a thing, and yes, I've had this discussion before, but you need to overpower items. There are items that need to be overpowered because they have to be exceptional in that way. Got to get away from this fear of making things crazy. I get it. There's going to be situations where they create a huge advantage, but that's exactly the point. Exactly the point.
Well, I think we'll kind of start touching on some of the repercussions of how they create items here. Because I know a few responders actually mentioned, we already touched on the affixes thing, it's just basically of the
Diablo.
The random prefix, suffix, basically dictating what stats an item has in an effort to, it makes it really easy to manage, right? As a developer, you could imagine, this particular suffix is, 20% of players have an item with this suffix. Let's give that a little bit of a nerf so that I could see why it's appealing, because it's easier to manage, but having specific items be, strong and kept for a while, I like the idea of that better. But anyway, we do have some responses. So first off, Gotta shout out LaFale. It's always in here. I swear it's an accident, but he's just everywhere, right? So, but he popped in to say, and I thought of this when we were just talking too. So, if games have like a salvage mechanic to get through excess gear, you would think that would give a purpose to just getting gear drops all the time. But to LaFale, he's saying it still feels like really useless or ill-conceived, or I would like add on to that, like it feels like a cheap mechanic to solve that, right? And I know we're running into this in New World. I'm gonna throw it out there.
I was thinking the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean a ton of games, modern games, but they salvage is a thing, but it's to the point where I mean you just get an inventory full of stuff, and for the most part you just like salvage it all.
just replace all that crap with coin. Just replace it with coin.
Right.
You don't need that. You don't need to populate your game with garbage. Garbage items.
And it also follows that same trope we were just talking about with the affixes, where all of the items are perfectly balanced. Like there's a specific amount of stat that an item can have with respect to the gear score. And so you can, exactly what to expect. Like there is no item that goes above that threshold, whether it has a name or not.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that takes away all the potential for winning the lottery. You know what I mean?
Right.
You will never find, like, what the upper range is. It's good as it's going to get. And the affix suffix thing, I talked about it in my New World video a little bit. I just find it that it's an easy route, an easy mode for the developers, rather than curating your gear and making things, a little bit more.
Right.
It's been done, man. It's been done to death.
You can imagine how easy that would be to like populate an entire like drop, like a world drop set. Just basically, hey, here's what this means. Here's what this means. Here, populate 30 items that combine those.
Yeah. So right. So I mean, the title of the thread is "It's Raining Gear." It's raining players, and that's the problem. I mean, I don't think devs have really figured out how to deal with to scale items to player numbers, right? Like if you have 100,000 people playing your game, EverQuest never, I don't want to say never, but was never that kind of idea. They didn't design around this massive number of people, and now games like modern MMOs have to account for this huge amount of people. And I think this is one of those things that has
kind of overcompensating. They're like trying these cheap design decisions to solve that problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. And like byproducts popped in to point out that kind of what we were just talking about, the whole salvage thing. It's kind of comparable to like disenchantment in WoW, which, I mean, that's an entire profession basically made up to be an item sink, right? So it's like a whole crafting profession, more or less, to basically solve the problem of excess drops.
Which is interesting, and I'm not a WoW player, so I can't comment on it. But I think it's one of those things that I always say, like, if you can make it social, that's not that bad.
Right.
I mean, I get the idea there. I understand why they would do that. That makes sense.
And in WoW's defense, enchantment can be social, because you're like, hey, does anyone need a plus? I forget what the first kind of bonus you get. Minor stat plus stamina. Do you want your bracers with plus stamina? Like, and I'll do that for you or whatever. So in their defense, like they at least got that. But it's still, like, if you look at it from the perspective we are right now, it's kind of funny to me that the whole profession of enchantment is basically just a sink for unwanted items.
Yeah, junk collector.
Yeah, and so moving on to Jobson's response here. So Jobson's hoping that even mundane gear is harder to acquire than most magic gear is in like our general MMOs. And so that something that's magical, and I love this quote. So something that's magical should never be seen as vendor trash. I love that.
That's very, very true. Again, another trope that we've got into is this whole color coding system with green and purple and orange and these different colors denoting item tiers. And,
you're spoiling the thread, maybe without knowing it.
I wasn't looking ahead even. I wasn't even looking ahead. That's crazy. But that just tells you what what we're talking about is very endemic and well known in the community.
Yeah, like what does magical mean when it's something you don't care about? Like even in a high magic or high fantasy setting, an item that is magical seems like it would be important,
Maybe like once in a blue moon you find it at a vendor store when somebody sold it on accident. Like that's kind of cool,
Right.
if you're like, think about like a flea market, you go there and you're like, you find some sort of crazy, old, monkey paw or something like that.
Yeah, man, we could go so many places with that, because I've had definitely one too many D&D sessions of not being suspicious enough of the magical items that I buy.
Exactly.
But so let's see. We've got Manuk here. Several things in their post. It's a pretty big post. But one thing I kind of liked was this idea that it makes sense for mobs to have basic gear, like we were just talking about, like mundane gear. So generally stuff that doesn't really have stats, where it should be more rare to see like good gear or like gear with stats or special stuff. I think they mention you're killing bandits or something and you get like a club, but then every once in a while you get like a heavy steel mace or something that's better. So that kind of makes sense to me. So
yeah.
The idea is that you would see like a lot of mundane gear though, because it kind of makes sense for a bandit or whatever to have like basic boots, gloves, or like a tarnished sword or something. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, of course you're going to get some junk. I mean, you're going to get some junk gear, but, it's, you just gotta slow it down a little bit. You just gotta, lower the volume a little bit on this stuff, because it's so overwhelming and so like, crazy.
Right. And if you're getting overwhelmed with stuff that you feel like you need to keep, it puts this weird like pressure. But I actually really like this, and I was kind of extrapolating a little bit, but I really feel like it makes sense, because if especially if they make the drops vary by like the creature. So, if you're killing giant wasps, you're probably not going to get boots, but like maybe you get a rare, like pristine wasp stinger that, it's a dagger or something like that. It has like a poison, effect. Cause it makes sense. It gives you a reason to kill wasps. But you're not necessarily like, you're not getting a slew of stuff to make you feel like that, particular stinger is pointless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in New World, again, I kill a random corrupted and I get 3, a pair of boots, a spear, and a helm.
Yep.
I'm like,
like he's naked.
There's no way that there's no way that guy was carrying all that, nor was he wearing this good stuff that helped him in any way. Like, It just gets ridiculous, and it's frustrating, like I'd so much rather have less but more meaningful gear than a ton of nonsense.
See, I'm kind of leaning on, I don't know if this is exactly the opposite, but I like the idea of kind of having a ton of mundane stuff that makes sense to the mob type. Like, the basic gear for humanoids or creature specific like body parts that you could see as vendor trash if you were, needing that. Or maybe, there's some collector in a village that, is, looking for those wasps' legs or something, I don't know, whatever like that.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense. But then again, if you think about it, every humanoid you kill, unless they're naked, is going to have like basically a shirt, pants, boots, gloves, and a helm, right? Like,
Yes.
you can't go too far.
And
with
I think
that.
it was pointed out that, not everything is going to be, usable. You can kind of suspend disbelief to think like, okay, well, he was wearing that, but maybe after I killed him, that everything's torn up, so he only got boots, or whatever.
Yeah.
But then I kind of feel like, most things should have like some drop, even if it gets to the point where, and this is kind of first thoughts a little bit, but our bag space is going to be limited. And I actually would rather see more kind of mundane drops that, we open it up, we open up the loot container. We're like, all right, regular boots, whatever. And we move on to the next guy. Okay, regular stuff. But then you see like an icon that like you're not used to. And it's like, ooh, okay. But it still like fits that excitement because you're seeing something special. But also, it suits the other side where they're dropping things that are sensible that you might just not pick up, right? Like, because I have a problem with picking everything up. I already said that, but I want the game to train me to leave stuff, and then it also kind of adds to that a little bit because in these mixed level areas. Where one person maybe they're farming, maybe this might not be a great example actually, but maybe there's like a creature that a higher level is farming, or humanoids or whatever for a specific item, and they're just leaving the old stuff. Well, a lower level person can come in. And maybe some of the lower tier stuff is actually like a mild upgrade or something, and they get to kind of like scavenge a little bit, I guess.
This sounds like something you've done in the past.
Well,
this sounds like Desrin 101, how he acquires loot in games by scavenging other people's drops that they don't need anymore.
I just and people might see this as tedium, having most creatures drop something, but I would prefer having a ton of drops that I can like recognize and leave on the body, and then every once in a while see something in addition to that, then know that if something, has the little like loot icon where I can loot them, oh, that means that there's something I need to take, like something that's worth looting. I actually kind of desire stuff like getting items that aren't worth looting most of the time.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. I wouldn't say I would want some sort of like indicator that they have more than just junk loot on them. And I will say that if they haven't trained you not to pick up all the junk by now, it's not going to happen. Like you're too far down the road. Nothing is gonna fix this issue for you.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I had my piece. VR, do with that what you will. Anyway, we'll get into the kind of follow-up post here from Muggs that you are already kind of led into, and that was bringing up the whole idea of maybe let's just do away with the whole loot rarity colors, right? Like
100% and 100%.
And it seems like most of the replies agree. I think there were there's a few people in there that were kind of arguing against it, like saying it might be a bit semantic, that maybe there's a deeper issue with the coloring of items, that maybe it's not the coloring that's the problem. Or, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to that, but I think Vandrad really put it well here. Vandrad, and I'm kind of condensing here, but said, let the players decide whether something is good or not. Let them read, let them read, let them compare. It also notice it just feels a lot better when you have to seek out a specific enemy or enemy type rather than just like a, world loot table like we were talking about a bit ago. It like feels like more of an accomplishment, right? So,
yeah.
And this kind of ties into what I was talking about, like where you're actually reading the items to know whether like that's good.
Like that's that's the game within the game, is figuring all this stuff out, figuring out what's good and what's not good, because people aren't looking for the same things. The coloring of items, it's the same thing as gear score. It's a shortcut, right? It's a shortcut to tell somebody, so they don't have to think about it. They don't have to figure out why it's good. They just know orange is better than purple, purple's better than green, and green is better than, or blue, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. You know, it's the same thing as gear score. Just look at a number. Okay, this is better. Dandrid's 100% right. People, it's the half the fun is figuring this stuff out. And why have we decided we don't want to do this anymore? That's great.
Like you see a pair of boots that's like white, the name is white or something, and if you didn't know any better, you would just leave that or vendor trash it. But then the aspiring reader would see like, wait, those boots have like twice the AC as the boots that I have, and I might sacrifice like 2 stamina or something, but gain like a ton of AC, and they would just have to like know that, right? Like I do.
We don't need to go so fast. Slow down and figure things out.
Yeah. And here we go. Dorothea later seems to agree that drop should make sense for the creature, but so here, we're gonna get into some interesting territory here. So they take it a little bit further, saying gear should even maybe fit and make sense in realms of like size, where you can reasonably stretch a human's breastplate to fit an ogre or shrink it to fit a gnome. How do you feel about that there?
I don't think that's really feasible. I don't think it's, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of cool. I mean, it's a good idea from a realism standpoint.
Right.
It's been brought up before, and it's huge ask, right?
Yeah, I definitely respect the realism side. Like if there was such a game as like a fantasy sim, I think that would be really appropriate. But for this, I think how bad it would feel to get a drop that was good that you can't
not
equip.
In your size.
Exactly. I think the negative right there would kind of outweigh the positive. But again, maybe we need to create a new genre for fantasy sims, because we've got military sims, we've got racing sims. Like,
I don't think we need a body size sim, to be honest with you. I think that might not work out so well. I don't know.
All right. So then we've got Uther here adding that they'd like to see more component drops from creatures, especially named creatures, rather making the drops for crafting rather than just strictly like full gear drops. And OVR has talked about this, but definitely ties into the conversation. Where it, and I do kind of wonder how far they're going to go for the labeling and tagging of on tooltips, because you could imagine like a stinger dropping. I keep going back to stinger. I think I just have wasps on the mind. But
have you been stung recently?
But that you drop, for all like maybe it's vendor trash, but maybe a crafter could actually use that, for something.
Yeah, and that's where my hoarding tendencies tend to get into play, is when I think that something might be useful for crafting and it's not just obvious vendor trash.
Right.
So it's not gear for me necessarily. It is more along the lines of like, this might be valuable to a alchemist or something, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I would run into the same thing, like not being sure. But I don't know. I'm a little bit amiable towards not having that completely labeled, I think. Because they could probably add, something in the tooltip saying like crafting component or something like that. That would be fine. I wouldn't hate that. But if they did the other way, and for all intents and purposes, it kind of looks like the same thing that you would sell to a vendor, snake skins or whatever. Like you could imagine, well, I'd probably use snake skins for crafting somehow, or I could just get a quick few coppers. Might add a little bit to OC chat. Like, hey, does anyone know if this is used for anything?
Figuring it out, right, amongst either yourself or with people around you. That's again part of the fun.
Yeah, I think that kind of condenses a lot of what this is all about. Is maybe just add items that have high identity, which would inevitably mean less items that are statted that are like comparable that we are getting all the time. So making like kind of every increase that we get to feel better, right? So we'd kind
and Joppa's talked about that a lot. I think that's very much in the cards, in the plans for Pantheon.
Yeah. And I gotta admit, I do very much like the idea of doing away with rarity colors, or at least kind of making them mean more or something different than they currently do. And even just like, let's just toss out the affix system, like,
get rid of it. It's gone.
Yeah.
Don't want anything to do with it.
So, but yeah, there's tons of responses. So as usual, definitely go check the thread out, or the Twitter thread, whatever suits your fancy. But I feel like this is hard to fit into 250 characters.
Yeah. As everything is.
Right. Because I mean, this is one of the top tier conversations around Pantheon, I think, is item identity. That's just always been a thing. So just more
100%.
input we can have in this. You never know when one person's going to have an idea that like sparks something just to make the game a lot better. So go ahead, contribute.
Yeah.
Again, it's on the official forums. I'll put a link in the description if you're looking there too.
Yep.
And hey, this week we've got an introduction.
Yay, yes. Back from the dead.
I was waiting. So this week we've got Dikenzu, who very helpfully sounded out the name in their post. Thank you for that. They also had a really cool description of like where the name Dikenzu comes from, or is derived from.
Oh, neat.
Which I thought was
cool.
pretty neat. And it looks like they are looking to play a human cleric and also a dwarf or human paladin as well. They reference some like D&D background. You know.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So judging by that post, I think they're going to fit right in here with what Pantheon is going for.
Yeah, welcome, Dikenzu. That's awesome that you joined up. Appreciate it.
Yep, a welcome from me as well. Thanks for putting that in there. And if you are so inclined, go check out that post, say hi, make them feel especially welcome to the forums, to Pantheon, etc., etc. So, but that is it for this week's community discussions.
Sit back and relax. It's time for the lore you know. Okay, I know last week I promised we would get some lore in this week, and I'm not going to disappoint. I don't want to do that. But I had to decide, what lore I wanted to cover this week, and figured we could connect it a little bit to the piece mentioned from the AMA stream. So talking about the Burning Sanctum specifically. So this week we're going to start our reading of the history of the ogres. And we're going to go through, where they come from, their home planet, and what life was like there. We're going to talk about their struggles against the Ravaging Lord and what led them to eventually retreating into the Burning Sanctum. So sit back and enjoy the written words of Pantheon's lore master, Mr. J.N. Gerhardt, as I try to give voice to the plight of the ogres on Terminus. With their hulking presence and a culture that values the brutal skills of battle above refinements of leisure, the ogres of Broken Maw are perilously dismissed as primitive by the uninformed. Yet, careful study would reveal a race that relishes the dance of warfare tactics, and in whom resides an unmatched respect for valor and courage, whether friend or foe. When calm, ogres are cautious and considerate before action. Unseat their emotions, and their incomparable size wreaks unpredictable ends. Gorok, a world of glacial ranges, magma flows, expansive mountain plateaus, and cave jungles where the very insects were said to grow to the size of a terminus halfling. On the continent of Suroth dwelt the 7 clans of the ogre race, coexisting only by forced observance of sacred borders. These boundaries were handed down by the deities of the Graven Hold, along with the cryptic 7 Tomes of War. One bestowed to each clan, the tomes leveraged a promise of unrivaled power against a warning of permanent defeat. The Gravenhold hid the bulk of the tome's knowledge within an indecipherable labyrinth of ruins, until a time when the volumes would be shared amongst the 7 clans equally. If even one tome was destroyed, the Pantheon would permit the ogres be wiped from the face of Gorok. However, there was no mandate that they be used. Thus, within their territories, each militant clan thrived to the extent they respected those limits, the vast wisdoms of the tomes remaining untapped, for no clan lord would dare share his birthright with another. Each clan handled their tome in their own manner. Bloodmare commissioned a hereditary order of mages to decipher the ruins apart from collecting them all. Way of Aster kept theirs suspended over a pool of magma beneath their mountain fortress, chained to 6 blind warriors spread about the cauldron, illuminated only by molten rocks. If they perished, so did the tome, an effective if perilous tactic that illustrated the ogre mindset in battle.
My foe dies, or we both do.
The smallest clan of the 7, Black Moon, memorized their few legible runes from childhood, relying on them for survival more than any other. But from prosperity to poverty, circumstance only masked an instinct that welled up in each clan, rising from the soul of every ogre, male or female: dominance, by right of conquest. And there exists no proving measure for an ogre greater than defeating another ogre. And that's the lore you know. So that, my friend, brings us to the end of episode 79. Desrin, I thank you, as always, for all the hard work you put into this, and having you by my side. It is always a treat.
Yeah, it's a good, cozy conversation. I hope everyone enjoys it as much as we do. And yeah, we love our community around this. Thank everyone for listening, and et cetera, et cetera.
Totally. Yep. So wherever you are, whatever weather you're experiencing, hopefully you're keeping warm and enjoying your day. And as always, thanks for hanging out. We hope you would be so kind as to leave a like on the YouTube video if you're watching it there, or give a rating on your podcast platform. Leave a comment if you're interested in anything we've talked about in the show. All that stuff helps Pantheon Plus and Pantheon in general get discovered by new potential gamers, new potential community members, and grow the community. So that's what we're all about here. So with that said, I will say have a great week, and we will see you next time.
Stay cozy, friends.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at Desrin Does also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.